Hello, my name is Roberto. I'm going to present Moodoo the Tracker, Spatial Classroom Analytics for Characterizing Teachers' Pedagogical Approaches. And first and foremost, I would like to introduce the Moodoo, which is a character of the film Rabbit Proof Fence. And this actor characterizes a tracker, an Aboriginal tracker in Australia, which was in charge of following the cues that people leave behind when walking in the desert. And inspired by this idea of looking at the footprints, we wanted to address this question: how does a teacher learn to move in the classroom space effectively by looking at the digital footprints that the teacher leaves behind in the classroom? We ran a pilot study before the study presented in the paper. It was a very small study in a small classroom, and we were looking at how a teacher was attending 3 groups of students and using these positioning badges that track the X-Y coordinates of the teacher, and also placing positioning sensors on the tables. And this was a very interesting first attempt to start seeing how the classroom is being utilized. And we generated heat maps for the teacher to reflect after the class, but also a live teacher dashboard to warn the teacher when he was spending too much time with a particular team of students. And then we also started to investigate more thoroughly what are the preferences of teachers when interacting with this kind of data, which is very unusual for teachers to look at their digital traces of proxemics. And we look at 3 different situations besides this first study, which was in the field of design. We also observe science laboratory classes and also healthcare. And we interviewed various teachers to understand what are the needs in terms of physical positioning and spatial pedagogy, which is about how they use this space to enact a pedagogical design. So this particular paper had a contribution to more deeply understand the technical aspects and the set of metrics that we can obtain from spatial modeling of these X and Y coordinates of the teachers in order to identify the strategies that they are following and be able to characterize those strategies. So the particular context of this paper is in the lab study, one of the 3 that I presented before. And this is an instance of co-teaching. 2 teachers are moving around this classroom where students are working in groups of 3. They have experiments on the tables, and these 2 teachers are coordinated themselves to attend all the students according to their needs. And they also have a little bit of teaching in the lantern, and sometimes they use a whiteboard to explain formulas, because this is the context of physics. For this context, we focus on 18 labs, 7 teachers, and they have different roles, from unit coordinator, 2 teachers with lots of experience, and 4 teaching assistants with less experience in these kind of labs. This is the top view of the classroom with some X and Y positioning traces. You can see what we did to obtain to these positioning traces was to set up some anchors around the classroom. And then we asked the main teacher and the teaching assistant wearing a badge, and that badge contained a tracker. And then by triangulating the location and the distance to the anchors, we end up with the coordinates. In this map, we have these circles that represent the student experiments. And that means that we didn't have to stick sensors on each student, but we knew that they were sticking around their experiment most of the time. Experiments couldn't be moved. And we have other spaces, the teacher's lantern, the whiteboard, and all the data points that you see are the blue is for the main teacher and the orange is for the teaching assistant. We observe 3 different learning designs. The first one was a prescribed lab. The teacher pretty much sets all the tasks. A project lab where the students put together their own projects, so it's more student-led. And then a theory lab where it's very different. Instead of each group of students having their own experiment, there are only 3 or 4 experiments, and the students need to move around. The teachers tend to to be stationary. This is how the X and Y position data look like. And we started to model these coordinates. Instead of looking at X and Y, we define constructs related to space and movement. Like, for example, when the teacher stops, that usually means that it's positioned to conduct some formal teaching or to stay alongside the student desk. And we use the theory of spatial pedagogy to model from the X and Y coordinates to these constructs. We also smoothen those transitions to measure the duration one teacher was in a specific place, and then when he was transitioning, and those transitions are also explaining the theory of spatial pedagogy as walking alongside of the rows of students, and that becomes the supervisory space when they are transitioning, just observing what the students are doing. We extracted a lot of metrics from this data. I invite you to check our paper because I don't have enough time to go through each of them, but we can pretty much calculate the total time the teachers stop, when and where, by which students, and from this we can also get the distance walked, the speed, the dispersion, how dispersed was the teacher. This is one example, like we started to compare learning designs, and for example, stops were significantly longer for the learning design 2 because the students come up with their own projects, and versus learning design 3, which was surprising because that means the teacher was moving more when they were presenting these stationary experiments than when engaging in students' own learning. So we can see that how the learning design makes a difference in the way the teachers engage with the students and the time dedicated to each of them. For learning design 1, for example, all the students conducted the same prescribed experiment, so that provoked that the teachers were providing corrective feedback immediately and then going to the next team, having shorter pauses. This is just one example of the kind of things we start observing by comparing learning designs. In this slide, you can see the comparison of two teachers. These are the teaching assistants. As a reminder, these are the ones that have less experience. And we start to get to see just from the heat maps, we see differences. But what about if we look at the metrics, the actual summative metrics from the positioning traces? We can see that the behaviors that we see on the left, for example, is a highly focused assistant. And on the right, we have a highly unfocused assistant, which is constantly walking and supervising. And obviously, the number of stops are more regular, more frequent. Instances of co-teaching, we can also observe how many times both teachers in the classroom are together, and we observe more in this unfocused assistant. So this suggests that the one on the left, both teachers probably split the classroom and they're organized in a different way. We also can extract other metrics, more advanced metrics like entropy, which is a measure that can give an indication of the focus. So entropy, this amount of information in the plane, can also be visualized in different ways to notice the difference of behaviors. Less focus on the right, a teacher is less focused versus the one that is much more focused on one part of the room, is not covering the whole space. And we also can obtain other measures like utilizing the Gini index to identify how unbalanced or egalitarian was the attention divided across all the students. So I highlighted in the students' positions in green, so it's easier to see how the one on the right cover pretty much touch base with all the students. So it just shows different strategies, nothing wrong with one or the other, although these can provoke actually lots of conversation among the teachers. And in the end, attention to students, which is how close to the students the teacher was, the one on the left spent 40 minutes out of the whole 1 hour and a half of effective time attending to students, while the other one only 25 minutes because he was walking a lot. So as a wrap up, what we are trying to do here, and this is just an illustration of other things that you can find in the paper, we are trying to come from low-level X and Y positional data to higher other spatial constructs that can help us understand how is the classroom activity. We are talking about classroom analytics and bringing theory of proxemics, which is not necessarily coming from education, but more for ergonomics, and spatial pedagogy, which is also a theoretical perspective, which is not that well understood yet, to give meaning to this data. And we want to go at a higher level of constructs, and that's what we're working on now. We are working on embedding different kinds of data, like the body orientation of the teacher, and exploring new questions. For example, the impact of the space design on teaching behaviors, on the impact of social distancing in the classroom. That's another study that we just published in a journal of health. And also including alternative sources of data. We are also considering speech and qualitative annotations to enrich the sense making of this positioning data. So if you have any question, we would be really, really interested to talk with you and find potential ways for collaboration. Thank you very much.